live stream viewers, and they'll start joining in a few minutes as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go.
So, hello, Ruby community. I hope all of you are having an amazing weekend. So I wasn't kidding when I said that, we're not coming slow with webinars for this year. And of course, I am really, really proud that, we have for this year specifically for 2022, we have been having an amazing response in terms of speakers, and a lot of high profile speakers like Jeremy, Code with Jason, and today Cezar Halmagean, he's joining us. So I think it's a really, really great opportunity for the Ruby community in Pakistan to be able to, learn from such high profile Rubyists. Right. So for today's 21st webinar session, that is on Hotwire and building reactive Ruby on Rails applications without any JavaScript. So without further ado, we have Cezar Halmagean. He is a Ruby on Rails consultant, and he is also the owner of Mix and Go. Mix and Go is a company where they help developers learn Ruby on Rails, web development, and everything like that. And what Cezar has been doing an amazing job with Mix and Go. I will also link his YouTube channel below in our description box. He has amazing content. I personally have been, enjoying his content as well, like his YouTube videos with regards to not just Hotwire, but also other Ruby on Rails, aspects. So he's been doing an amazing job. His tutorials are honestly really beginner friendly, and I am 100% sure that today's webinar session is a must attend for all the Rubyists, because today's session, it's really beginner friendly. Cezar has made an amazing presentation for us. I checked it out. I thought it was awesome. And not just talking about Hotwire, one thing that Cezar is really addressing here is Ruby on Rails worth learning in 2022? So make sure to stay till the end of the live stream. I want to thank Cezar for joining us. Thank you, Cezar, for taking out the time for today's session. It's honestly an honor to have you.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Honestly, the pleasure is all ours. So for the people who don't know me, I am Sabrina Ahmed Malik. I am the community lead and digital marketing expert at RubyConf Pakistan. If you want to reach out to me for anything that's related to RubyConf Pakistan, feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. But with regards to today's topic, one thing I also wanted to mention is that, we will be talking about Hotwire. We will also be talking about the features, turbo streams, turbo frames, turbo drive, everything. Cezar is going to go really much in depth in today's session, so make sure to check it out. With regards to the Q&A format, that's going to be at the end of the presentation, so make sure that all of you guys do put in your questions in the live chat. I will be, me and Cezar, of course, will be addressing all of them one by one. So we have Salman Beg, he is saying, welcome Cezar. Sufyan Iqbal, hi. Daud Sadiq is saying, hello guys. Hello to everyone back. And let's start with the presentation. Cezar, you can start your screen share.
Yeah, give me a second.
All right.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Cool. So yeah, hello everyone. I'm not gonna see the chat, so it's probably Sabrina who's gonna tell me what's going on in the chat, but I'm gonna start with the presentation. So my name is Cezar, and today we're gonna look at what Hotwire is about, and more specifically, how it helps you to build reactive Rails applications without JavaScript, or at least make it optional. So the goal for today is I want you to understand what Hotwire is all about. And after this presentation, you should at least feel comfortable about reading the documentation and understanding what the various tutorials and YouTube lessons are all about. So you should have a understanding of at least high level how Hotwire works and what it can do for you. And lastly, a more interesting idea is will this be a game changer going forward for both Ruby on Rails and the web development community in general? Or will it change how we build Rails applications and web applications in general? So that's kind of a topic I want to explore and let you know what I believe. So this talk, like Sabrina mentioned, is about Hotwire, and it's targeted at more of a beginner level. So if you're starting out learning Rails or Ruby, or if you have very little experience with web development in general, this is definitely for you. You'll see how Rails approaches building web applications with this new technology. And also, if you're an experienced developer, but didn't have time to look into what Hotwire has to offer, or maybe you've looked at the documentation, the official docs, and couldn't figure out what it's all about, you'll probably pick up a few things from this talk. And lastly, if you're a JavaScript developer, you're gonna see how Rails is building web apps as in relation to single page apps or React and Angular and whatever you have used before. And I think that's very different, and it might give you some ideas. So yeah, I think Sabrina mentioned this before. The big question, I always get this question, both from my YouTube channel and my email list is it worth spending your time and resources investing in Rails? Because a lot of people are kind of afraid it doesn't really have a future because it's not as popular as the other languages and frameworks. So you'll see JavaScript mentioned a lot and Python, and Rails is not so much. So I want to address this question before we start. And I want to tell you a little bit about how it was when I started, because when I started, companies were kind of afraid to pick up Rails because it was very new and they saw it as a risky investment. And so most people and companies that were going with Rails were very small startups that had the guts to take on this risk, and they had basically had nothing to lose. But this was like 15 years ago or so. And now Rails is a lot more mature, and it's got a lot of libraries and community around it. And so it's less risky for big companies to go with Rails and build MVPs and whatnot. But more importantly is that now teams that are using Rails are big. Like I've seen clients of mine have hundreds of developers, Rails developers in a team. And they have big budgets and they can afford to hire and pay large salaries. And so I think that's something important to consider when you're thinking about investing your time in learning Rails. The job market is very active. In fact, it's hard for companies to hire fast enough. They are having a hard time finding enough talent. And I can confirm that because I do get a lot of job offers on LinkedIn. I did. Oops, did something happen there?
There was an internet outage from my end, but I believe we are still going live. So you can continue with your presentation.
Cool. Yeah, so I did go to glassdoor.com to take 2 screenshots about junior developer salaries when it comes to Rails, and then senior developers. So you can see the left side there are an estimated average salary for a junior developer. And on the right, you can see estimates for senior developers. And I think on the senior side, at least, it's kind of on the low end there. So you can expect to earn big salaries as a Rails developer. And going forward, I do think that, especially with this new Hotwire technology, I think the landscape is going to change a lot, at least for Rails, if not for other technologies. But we'll see what happens. But that's just my belief. So who am I? My name is Cezar. I own mixandgoto.com. And I also have this YouTube channel called Mix and Go, where I post videos about Rails, more specifically about Hotwire lately. And I do also have videos about design patterns with Ruby and some Rust videos if you're interested in that. But I mostly post about Rails. If you want to learn about Hotwire, you can visit my channel and you'll find a lot of videos there. I also have a Hotwire playlist that you can use to filter the Hotwire videos. I'm also a speaker and an author. I've written this ebook called Bulletproof Ruby on Rails Applications, which is focused on making you more confident in writing Rails code through various techniques that I've discovered over the years. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's about me. Most of my career, I've been a Rails developer, and that's like, I think it's close to 15 years now. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about how we got to Hotwire, where this all started, and how did we get here, basically. And when I started, most Rails applications were built with just HTML generated on the back end and a little bit of JavaScript, a very minimal use of JavaScript. And the framework of choice back then was Prototype.js. I'm not sure if anyone is still using that now, but that was what I was using when I first started. And at some point after that, I'm not sure how much it took, but jQuery kind of became popular and took over Prototype.js's market, so to speak. And it remains so. I think people are still using jQuery right now. I'm not sure, but I think I've seen a few questions here and there about jQuery. So I think a lot of people are still using that. But to kind of make a connection to the current world of JavaScript, back then I used a framework called Backbone.js, and this was probably more than 10 years ago when the App Store for iOS came out, and everyone was kind of rushing to build iPhone apps because they kind of got a lot of adoption really quickly. And so what we did then, because we didn't have a huge team or resources to hire iOS developers, we had this iOS app that would render a web view, which was like a browser without the controls of the browser, but it could render a website inside of it. So that would fetch the website, and the website would be a single page app, basically written in Backbone.js, that would communicate over with the API that was built in Rails, fetch JSON data, and build the HTML for the website like that. So pretty much like what React does right now. But this was way back, and it wasn't as robust, of course. But it did the job. We were able to ship an iOS-like app. Of course, it didn't feel like an iOS, but it would have the right content, and people used that basically. So that was my first encounter with the single-page apps of the time. And then Angular.js and Ember.js got on the scene. And to be honest, my preference for JavaScript apps at the time was I wanted to keep the JavaScript code separate. And when I saw Angular, it didn't kind of appeal to me. So I kind of ignored that. And Ember.js was taking JavaScript to the next level, or so it seemed back then, and it felt very complex. And so I kind of postponed learning that for a long time and never got to it. But after that, I discovered React.js, which felt very minimalistic compared to Angular. And I kind of liked it and looked into it for a while. And then I discovered Redux. And because Redux was inspired by this language called Elm, I looked at Elm and kind of fell in love with it because I think it's a great language for building JavaScript side applications. And so I used Elm for a few years now, and I think it's great, but I'm not going to talk about that today. Vue.js is also another popular framework. To me, that looked a lot like Angular, so I didn't explore it too much. I don't know much about it, but it's one of the popular ones for sure. And so after that, I kind of dabbled into other languages. After finding out, I discovered Elixir and Phoenix. And Phoenix is the Rails framework for Elixir. It's very similar to Rails. But what's relevant to this discussion about it is it's got a feature called Live View. And Live View is almost what Hotwire is for Rails. It's doing HTML diffs over WebSockets. So it sends diffs to the current page and updates the DOM like that. So when I saw Hotwire being pushed out, I thought it's basically Live View, but for Rails. And because Rails is probably slower than Elixir, I thought maybe it's not worth looking into it. But that was just my view at the time. And so then I kind of saw Hotwire all over the place. People were mentioning it, articles were written about it, a few tutorials and stuff. So kind of raised my curiosity a bit, because I thought, well, maybe this is worth looking into. And I tried to look at the official docs. And to be honest, it was kind of cryptic, because I didn't see anything related to Rails there. And that's intentional on their side, because they want this to be backend agnostic, so you can use it with other languages as well. But for me, when I looked at the documentation, I didn't see the connection between Hotwire and Rails, so I kind of found it weird, and I couldn't really understand how to use it. And then I kind of digged into it. I stuck with it for a while, and tried to find more helpful tutorials and stuff. And finally, I jumped in and discovered what it can do and how it can improve everything. And so I decided to make some videos about it. So that's how we got to Hotwire. And what I want to answer today is 3 big questions about it. So first is why I think Hotwire is the future for Rails and for web development in general. How you can start learning Hotwire today, like after this presentation, what you can do to go ahead and continue your learning. And if it's going to replace your single page app of choice. We're going to talk about these 3 questions right now. Okay, so first one is why I think Hotwire is the future. And the first topic here is talking about the alternative, which is single page apps. And I think single page apps compared to Hotwire have a few disadvantages, in my opinion. And the first one is their complexity, meaning you kind of have to maintain 2 apps. And if you think about small teams or very, very small teams like solo developers and a few people, startups, it's hard to come up with those resources to be able to have 2 repositories and work on both and hire people that know both JavaScript and Ruby. It's kind of a hard thing to do, and it can get very expensive. Then there's also the context switching from JavaScript to Ruby, and some people have a hard time with that. You also need to think about API design, fetching just enough data, keeping the state in sync. Then there's also the tooling and bundling. So there's a lot of complexity when it comes to single page apps as compared to building everything in Rails and having the same user experience, which is what Hotwire kind of brings to the table. So Hotwire makes things easier when it comes to building that kind of experience for the user, like the reactive style experience, where everything feels very fast and snappy. And more importantly, why I think that Hotwire is going to succeed is because it addresses that problem for solo developers and very small businesses where they can build products without having to hire a huge team or a very expensive team of developers. So I think that's the sweet spot for Hotwire, like solo developers building their own product or side hustle, whatever you want to call that. Hotwire is the perfect tool for that. And then lastly, Hotwire is going to be the default front-end tool for Rails going forward as from version 7 and onwards. So I think all these reasons together make Hotwire very compelling to learn right now. Okay, so what you can do to start using Hotwire today? Well, first thing obviously is to watch this presentation, and I'm going to tell you all about how it works at a high level and also look at some code. The next thing is you can go to my YouTube channel and watch those tutorials, videos. And after this presentation, and maybe if you watch a few tutorials, so you'll be able to look at the official documentation with different eyes and understand more of why it's written like that. So that's at hotwire.dev. Okay, and lastly, this is very important because it's not something that you just read on a README page and you get it instantly. And this happened to me, and I do have a lot of experience with Rails. It's not something you get right away. It's something that requires a lot of persistence and patience and a few projects and trying to figure out what this I don't know, new idea or new concept is all about. So just give it some time before you decide if it's for you or not. And last question here is, will this replace your current React app or Angular app or whatever SPA you're using? And for new projects, that's if you're starting a project right now and you're deciding between Hotwire and React, I believe that 90% of the applications that most people are building don't need a React app or a single page app because most of them are somewhat simple and what they require technically. So Hotwire, I think it's a very good candidate for most of the applications that you're going to build. And the best part is you can switch if you really have to or really want to. And also if you're a small startup and trying to come up with features that people want to buy, Hotwire is a good candidate which will allow you to write a feature, deliver it, and if it's not good, then discard it and write another one. So that development cycle is going to be very, very fast as compared to building an API and then building a client-side app and then doing that a few times over. So for those kind of projects, I think Hotwire makes a lot of sense. Then if you have an old Rails project, you can bring in the Turbo Rails gem and the Stimulus Rails gem to use Hotwire in your old projects. It's not going to be as easy as making a new project, but it's there, so you can use it. Now, thinking about single page apps and full stack Rails apps, like the difference between them, there's a very fundamental difference between how they work. So the single page app talks to an API and fetches JSON from that API, and then it builds the HTML content for the page on the JavaScript side, right? So your JavaScript code is concerned about building the page, the HTML structure of the page by getting the data from the API. And on that part, like this single page app part, you have two components that need to talk to each other. And one thing that you should think about is how do you make the page load something when the user first gets there? Like you need to make that fast, right? The first page that the user lands on, how do you do that? And then the template, the rendering part, doing that on the client side is different than doing it on the backend side. And also testing. If you need to test both the client and the backend, you have multiple options, none of which is ideal. Like you could test in isolation your client side, you can test in isolation your backend side, and then in between them, you probably have a contract testing mechanism, something like that. Or you could test them in integration, like both at the same time, but that's hard to do. So there are a few things you need to consider when building single page apps, things like that, where on the Hotwire side, like on the back end, you don't have these problems. You don't, so Hotwire doesn't give you back JSON, it gives you back HTML, right? So that HTML over the wire is what Hotwire is in the name there, right? And then you don't have to worry about first page loads because that's very fast. You don't have to worry about templates and rendering on the client side because that's all done on the back end. And also you're very productive because you have to write just very minimal code, and testing is easier because you have all the tools there. So yeah, you kind of need to think about these and weigh the trade-offs. For me personally, because I'm not a huge company with a lot of developers, I will pick Hotwire any day. But you don't have to pick one or the other. You can use both. Like you can use Hotwire, and then you can use React, for example, to create some components in your page that are integrated in the Hotwire ecosystem. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. If not, please ask more in the Q&A session. Okay, so now let's look at what Hotwire is all about. So Hotwire has these 4 major components, and one of them is Turbo Drive, which is concerned about navigating between pages without doing the full page reload, the classical full page reload. Then there's Turbo Frames, which is splitting a page into multiple components and then replacing those components when something changes there. And then there's Turbo Streams, and Turbo Streams are concerned about multiple updates at the same time on the page. And we're gonna talk about each one, but with Turbo Streams, you can also stream to multiple browsers when something happens in the model side. And there's also Stimulus.js, and Stimulus.js is the JavaScript side of Hotwire, where you can add more JavaScript if you want to. Okay, so let's see how Turbo Drive works. With Turbo Drive, you kind of have the same single page app persistent process, which does everything for you, but you don't have to think about client-side routing or state management and all that. You only need to write your Rails code as you did before, and everything is done for you. So how Turbo Drive works is it intercepts a link click, and it makes that a fetch, a JavaScript fetch, and then sends that to the browser. And the browser will, to the server, and the server will respond with a full document, and the head of that document is going to be merged with the current head, and the body of the document will replace the current body. So that's kind of what Turbo Drive does. It replaces the body of the page, the full page, and it merges the head, and that makes it feel very responsive because it doesn't do the page reload. And then it also uses some caching mechanisms to, when you click the back button, for example, to decide if it needs to fetch a new page or just render the cached one and things like that. So Turbo Drive is about full page content, right? But sometimes you don't need the full page. You can, you only want to replace a particular smaller part of the page. And at that point, you can use Turbo Frames, and Turbo Frames is used to decompose your page into smaller components. So for example, you could have a form and some other div with a link or things like that. And then when you click or submit a form, the same thing happens. Like the link or the submit is intercepted by the JavaScript side, and then it's converted to a fetch and sent to the server, and then the server is going to respond with a new frame, which will replace your frame completely. So you can only do that one at a time. So you can only replace one frame at a time. So if you hit the link, for example, it goes to the server, comes back and replaces that entire frame. If you submit the form, goes to the server, comes back, replaces the form frame. So one form at a time, right? And this is very good, and you'll see in a moment an example that I built. But one thing that maybe it's not very obvious is you don't have to write almost any code. Like you wrap your existing template code with a tag and you're done, right? Rails does everything for you. That's all you have to do to convert your existing Rails template to a frame. And we're going to look at that as well. But think about that. It's like you only write one line of code and done, right? Also, the frames can be eager loaded and lazy loaded, and they're very good for caching and making things faster. But let's look at how that works. So you have this turbo frame tag with an ID, and the ID has to be unique on the page. And inside that turbo frame, you've got this link that says click here. And when you click that link, the fetch request goes to the server. Server renders a template, and that template comes back as a response from the server, and it replaces the current frame, right? So the response from the server replaces the current frame, and everything else in that response gets ignored. So like if you have multiple frames in that response, all of them get ignored, and just the one with the ID you've clicked on, that's the one that's gonna get replaced. So that's how turbo frames work. Now, I've built an interesting example of this, which is a calculator, and you can find this on YouTube. And so this calculator does that. Like when you click one of the buttons there, it goes to the server, and the server makes up a new frame and replaces the existing one. And here's how it works. Right? So it's pretty cool if you think about it, but maybe not very useful. It's just to prove a point. It's that you can do things like this, and they feel very responsive using just turbo frames. And when I say using just turbo frames, I mean you can just use your existing HTML code and wrap it in a frame. So the way this works is you click one of. Okay. So
Hi.
the way.
Yeah. Just sorry to interrupt. We do have a little bit of power outage. So like if you can just go back one slide before and repeat just in case if we missed it.
Okay, so this example here, is this where you left off?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, so this is the example that I have on YouTube. And you can see it's just responding to user events. When you click one of the buttons, the entire calculator, the entire frame is replaced. So the way this works is one of the buttons gets clicked. There's a post request, which is converted into a fetch request and sent to the server. And then the server responds with a new frame. And the entire thing is replaced with new data, basically. Because as you saw, when you click a button, you see the number there, and that's coming from the response, everything. So yeah, if you want to see how this works in more detail, you can use that link at the bottom there. And look at the video on YouTube, and there's also the GitHub repository there if you want to look at the code. Cool. So again, turbo frames are concerned about replacing just one component on the page. And whenever you do a click or submit, just that one component gets replaced. But sometimes you have related components. Like maybe a good example would be if you have a counter somewhere on the other side of the page, and you're interacting with this div, and you want to update both the div and the counter. TurboFrames cannot do that because they're concerned about one frame only. And so that's where Turbo Streams come in. And Turbo Streams allow you to do updates on the page in multiple places. Like you can do multiple updates by giving it multiple instructions in the response. And so you'd have a form, for example, here that gets submitted as a post and then converted to a fetch to the server. And then the server, instead of responding with one frame like it did with Turbo Frames, it responds with multiple instructions for the update. So it could say, update this counter here, replace that content, delete this content, all in one response, right? So it's got a few types of actions that it can perform. And the way it looks like in code is I'm using just HTML code here on the template side, but you can use some Rails specific helpers that generate all this for you. But to make it easier to understand, you have this ID, right? So the div there with some ID, which contains the form, that's the target for the Turbo Stream. And when you submit the form, it goes to the create action on the controller. Controller creates a div, an HTML div, and then it renders a list of streams, right? So you can put multiple there because you see that there's an array of whatever you want to render. But I only have one in this example where it says, okay, I'm going to append to some ID this HTML code. And then that HTML gets generated by the controller, and it looks like this. So it's got the Turbo Stream tag with an action of append, and then a target, which is the ID that I've given in the controller. And then inside of that, there's a template. And whatever is in that template goes back and replaces the ID, or not replace, but in this case, it appends to that ID. Because you have multiple different actions. You can replace, you can update, you can append, you can prepend, you can remove, you can add content before or after. So yeah, and here's what that example specifically does. When you submit, it appends that same ID to the some ID div. And you can see each of the responses only has that small HTML fragment. It doesn't have the entire page like it would when you use a regular Rails app, right? So when the response comes back, it gives you back the entire document. This gives you just the specific tag, like the Turbo Stream tag. And with this, you can do more interesting things like I'm showing here. This is another video I have on YouTube where I'm doing inline editing, right? So I can delete rows. I can add different rows here. And you see, these are very responsive. You don't see a full page reload. I can edit inline, right? Changing the dates there. I can delete records and edit records. All of that happens very fast and looks very responsive. And the way this works, the controller code for that is, as you can see, very minimal. You don't have to write a lot of code. It's like a regular create action. You just build the resource, and if that's valid, you render something. And in this case, in the create action, I'm rendering two Turbo Streams. One is to prepend the user's div with the new user, and the other one is to replace the form with a new form. So I'm doing two updates on the page at the same time. And then the update action, again, it takes the params, it updates the user, and if that's successful, it replaces the user row in the table. And the destroy action does the same. It destroys the user, and then it removes the row from the table. And so Turbo Streams, I mentioned it can do broadcasts. So if you have multiple users connected to the same channel, it can broadcast to all of them. So multiple windows will see the updates. And you can hook into the broadcast. Oops. I think recording stopped again.
Yes, so we are having a little bit of internet issues. I apologize. That's probably from my end. So Cesar, I would like to request you again, just go 30 seconds before, just to be on the safe side, so that we do have it on recording.
Okay, I'll go back one slide. So I mentioned that you can do broadcasts. So if you have multiple users connected to a channel, they can receive updates, and that's because because of Active Record, you can hook into the Active Record callbacks and trigger those updates. And here's an example of me doing that. Again, this is on YouTube as well. You'll see two windows here, and whenever you sign in or sign out from one of them, you'll see the change on the other window by looking at the on and off highlighting there. So I'm signing out, and you see the user goes off, and then I'm signing in again. And if you look at the other window, you'll see it goes back to on, and the same goes for this window on the left. And again, if you want to see how that's done, you can go to that video and look at the code as well. But basically, this is what happens inside the model. So you have these callbacks that you can hook into, and you can broadcast changes. And those changes will be turbo streams, and you have instructions there to update the page however you want. Yeah, so that's how turbo streams work. And now we're going to talk a little bit about Stimulus.js, because this is the JavaScript part of Hotwire. It's optional because you can do a lot, and everything you've seen so far is done without JavaScript. So I haven't written any JavaScript at all for that. But you could also add some JavaScript with Stimulus.js, which works very well with Hotwire. And what Stimulus.js, or what the philosophy around it is, it has objects for HTML elements. So basically, you can say this particular element in the page is connected to an object on the stimulus side, and that object is called a controller. And it's got actions, which are basically methods for that object. And it doesn't really care too much about building or constructing the template like all the standard SPA frameworks do. It's just rendering or sending requests and rendering HTML back. And it doesn't try to keep state at all or manage state. Its philosophy is to use the state in the DOM, so to keep the state there, and then have these objects be stateless. You also have some lifecycle callbacks that you can hook into. So whenever you connect to one of the DOMs and disconnect and things like that. Okay. So basically, you can have multiple DOM nodes that you can hook into different stimulus controllers, and you can handle user-generated events in those controllers and do whatever you want. Maybe you want to add some animation, or maybe you want to, I don't know, add some spinners and whatnot. I don't know. This is how a stimulus controller looks like. On the top left there, you'll see it's got an object with one method, the submit method. And I've got a form on the lower right there, which says controller dropdown. That's the name of the file in which that JavaScript code lives. So the dropdown controller is specified, and then as the action is the action that the user will perform, and that action is the change action. And whenever the form changes, or the, whoops, I'll repeat that. So, okay. So the form tag there is connected to the dropdown controller, and the action says whenever the drop down, whenever something in the form changes, it's going to call the drop down controller's submit method, which will submit the entire form. And that's what I'm using on this example here, where I have this car make model year drop down. So each drop down is dependent on the one before it, where you select the car, then the model, and then the year. And here's how this works. Right, so this is done with that code that you've seen. It's done with Stimulus.js because it needs to hook into that change event on the dropdown, and that's not something you get with Hotwire. That's why I needed that small Stimulus.js code. So yeah, hopefully this makes sense, and I really hope you're excited about Hotwire and what the new version of Rails has to offer. And also, if you feel overwhelmed with what you've seen here, don't worry, it's a lot to take in because Hotwire is doing things differently. But it's also kind of impossible for me to go into too much detail because there's so much to learn about it. But if you're interested to learn more about Rails and the new features and Hotwire, I do have an online course if you want to look at it. And it's early access right now. I'm still making content for it, but it's going to cover everything that's new in Rails 7, including Hotwire and all that. It's also got projects and assessments and certification and all that. And right now it's 20% off. So if you're interested, you can visit that link there at the bottom and check it out. So that's all I had to say for this presentation. And now I think we can switch to Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Cezar, for the wonderful presentation. I just want to apologize here. My internet has been acting really strange for today. I think all of the Pakistani Rubyists could agree with me that we've been facing a lot of internet issues recently.
Don't worry
so
about
I apologize for that. But moving forward towards our Q&A session. So we had actually a very healthy discussion in our live stream chat.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So do let me know if if you can't hear me, you can write it here in the chat. So I will just go over some of the comments that were added in the live chat. And also, guys, so while I address the previous ones, you can ask all the questions that you want. So we'll be addressing them right now. So moving towards to the comments. So Kamaluddin, he was saying, welcome, Cezar from Pakistan. We are really thankful and appreciate your presence here.
Thank you.
All right. So Rana Hasib is saying hi. Hi back, Rana Hasib. It's really nice to have you. Junaid Ehsan, also thank you so much for tuning into our live stream. So let's move towards the, there was like this really healthy discussion. So Kamaluddin was saying that, companies can't really find resources here because not a lot of people are learning Rails. The adoption rate is really slow. Rails, of course, is amazing, but its slow speed and lack of resources makes it market competitive, but diminishing too. To which Junaid Ehsan weighed in that slow is a very subjective term. It depends on what you're building. And then he further adds on that, Rails is more designed for custom solutions. So there's that. Kamaluddin did mention here that Rails is apparently slow compared to Go, C++, JavaScript. But now we have an awesome solution. Recently, we migrated to Ruby 3. That's great for you. So this was like a really debate that was going on. I mean, if you want to weigh into any of this, it would be great.
Yeah. Maybe I forgot about all the questions, but I think that with Rails being slow kind of jumped at me. And yes, I agree. Rails is not the fastest framework, or Ruby the fastest language, but performance speed is not necessarily the bottleneck for most companies, at least most companies that I've seen. A lot of them struggle with shipping fast enough and building as fast as the user demands new features. And I think obviously there's no ideal solution for solving all the problems. Like if you're a very established company and you don't have this delivery problem, like you need to ship new things very fast, maybe you can afford to write the slow parts in different languages, or I don't know. There are different solutions, because that's why there are different programming languages, right? Not every language is designed to solve that same problem. Some of them are designed for developer experience, like Ruby is. Others for speed. I don't know. I would agree that Rails is not the fastest, but I don't think the bottleneck for most companies that are using Rails is performance. I think the bottleneck is, do we have enough resources or money in the bank to make this company profitable before we run out of money? I think that's one of the bigger problems, because if your company fails because you cannot ship fast enough, then you don't worry about performance, right? But obviously, once you get past that, you can decide, okay, Rails is too slow for us because we have these too many requests and we cannot handle that, which it depends. There are very few companies that have that problem, to be honest. I've recently worked with a client that had millions and millions of requests, and they were doing just fine with Ruby. So it also depends on how you optimize for that problem. And yeah, if Rails is not enough for you, then there's no one stopping you to go to a different language. But that language is not good for when you start, right? Like you could build your app in Rust, for example, which is very fast. But until you get to the same, market stage with Rust, it's going to take you a lot more time. And maybe you don't have that time. So yeah, that's my opinion on that.
100% agreed. Junaid Ehsan is also saying that was his point as well. I do agree because, well, Rails, like you said, every technology is built to address a certain, a certain development query, if you want to call it. So, I mean, like you said, I'm just gonna reiterate that, if performance and scalability is something, or development experience is something that is of more interest to you, so then again, it is up for you to decide what technology stack do you want to go for before
also,
building, a certain solution.
Also, just don't think you're not going to learn something else. Like smart contracts were not a thing when I started, right? New technology is always going to come up, and you'll have to learn new things. And so PHP is probably not the best language to write smart contracts because it didn't have that problem back then. But new languages are aware of that problem and they can optimize for that. So that's just one example. But as a developer, you're constantly going to learn. The technology is going to change. You'll just have more tools under your tool belt to decide which one is better.
Agreed. So we did also have Aisha Sadiqa. She was saying, hey guys, just wanted to thank you for making my weekend productive. Hi Aisha, we're glad you could join. So Junaid actually had a question while you were presenting earlier on partial. So his question was, Cezar, the response should be a partial or can be HTML tags like div, etc.
The response to which, so it doesn't really matter. It can be both. For turbo frames, it ignores everything else aside from the frame. So if your request comes from a frame with an ID, the response should include a frame with that same ID, and everything else will be ignored by Hotwire, and just that frame will be used to replace your current frame. And then with the turbo streams, with turbo stream is probably you're probably going to have either a new template or partial to update the page with new instructions, because in your initial render you'll probably not have those instructions. Right. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, so Janae did send his message. He is saying response to the controller action. So he was saying, I saw that in the next slide, but asked the question too early. That's all right. So we have another question from Muhammad Ahmed. He is asking, is it not possible to make a demo app for Hotwire during the presentation? Well, I think that would take a lot of time.
Right, I'm not sure what demo means, but if you're talking about writing code live, that's probably not the best use of your time.
Absolutely. And I think that, so we could do it maybe in another session for sure, but we will, so the problem with demos is that there are times when things can go wrong. So it might be, so like while you're debugging or troubleshooting your demo app, so it would be a lot of time, I believe.
Well, I do have a course which I've built especially for people that are asking this question, just as a, I don't know, as a response to that, because some people really want to see how I write code, and it took 16 hours and it was not done. Like the project was not done. So that takes a lot of time, because you need to do a lot of research, you need to do a lot of testing, and it's probably not the best use of your time to watch that. But yeah, so I don't know.
No, of course, I agree with you. So I believe in one of our webinar sessions, so we did try to do like a demo. I believe it was on GraphQL. So at the same time, it can be engaging because the live viewers, they kind of help you out with the troubleshooting. But again, it can, it's like, I'm really not sure. I would still be more inclined towards code samples, snippets. But again, if it's something, Emma, that would interest you, feel free to take Cezar's course where he'll be doing a demo with you. So there's that. So Sufyan is saying, so that this is something more related to, I believe, the Ruby on Rails resource demand and supply here in Pakistan. So his opinion is about to compete resources demand, hold seminars in universities, because many students not even know about Ruby on Rails. That's actually true. So one of the reasons we started doing these webinar sessions was to have like a digital presence, and especially for the Ruby community in Pakistan, have people learn about Ruby, learn about Rails. But of course, we would love to do something similar that is more of an on-site event, like maybe developer meetups. That is something that is in our pipeline. So Sufyan, if that is something of interest to you, please feel free to DM me. I would love to discuss more of that. So moving forward towards Hotwire, specifically, I wanted to talk about. So like I mentioned, Cezar, so we are also writing a blog post that is going to go live probably in the next week. And regarding Hotwire, I actually wanted your opinion. Do you think that Hotwire offers enough capabilities for a seamless front-end development experience? Do you think it's enough when compared to React, or do you think that you're going to miss out on certain features? Let's say if you're using Hotwire, what would be your comment on that?
I'm not sure what you mean by seamless development experience. Can you clarify that?
So I mean, sure, we already know that, React is already out there. It's in the market with regards to front-end development. And a lot of people are already, of course, very comfortable with it. There are complete front-end development teams that are using either React or Vue.js or whatever it is that they're using. But let's say, for example, there is a team, maybe, a small-sized team, and they do not want to go for a completely, dedicated React front-end development team. So let's say that, for example, that team decides to use Hotwire for their front-end needs, right? So do you think that Hotwire would provide you with enough capabilities, or do you think that they might be missing out on certain features? Is that even a thing? That's my question.
Yeah, Hotwire is not the answer for everything. Like,
Yeah.
so is React not the answer for everything. There are things you can do easier with Hotwire and Rails, but there are also other things that are more complicated if you go with Hotwire. So like, I wouldn't build Google Maps with Hotwire, right? I think the best use case for Hotwire is CRUD-like apps. So where you need to take user input, save it to the database, do something with it, and display a result. Like most of the web apps are that, basically. If you have a lot of real-time user-generated or very dynamic content that needs a lot of JavaScript rendering, you could do that with Stimulus, but I would suspect it's a lot more work than using something like React. Yeah, but on the other end, with Hotwire, you have the full stack app. With React, you need to also build the APIs, or at least consume some existing APIs from somewhere. So yeah, you need to weigh those things. But if the client side logic is very complex, like Google Maps, I don't have any other good examples right now, but I wouldn't necessarily build that with Hotwire. Maybe it will change because Hotwire is still new and it's still adding new features. We'll see what happens. But as of right now, I would probably go with some JavaScript-y language.
Great. Well, thank you for answering that. So along similar lines, Kamaluddin does also have a question. So Cezar, what are the factors that you would consider when deciding should you go on single page applications or use Hotwire? So he's talking specifically on the size of project, as I do understand you said with availability of resource, it's your decision.
I cannot think of a good example to go with single page apps. That's never my first choice. I always start with not even Hotwire, but since it's the default, you can use Hotwire to incrementally improve your app, but not even that. I would just build a full stack app if I were to start from scratch. And then whenever there's a need for better or more complex client-side rendering, then I would probably start to consider single-page apps. But I don't think single-page apps are a good candidate for most of the things that I do, simply because there's too much complexity for very little benefit.
All right. Well, thank you for answering that. Junaid Ehsan is also saying, what I see where Hotwire can really chime in is where companies are moving with microservices, and some microservices need minimalistic front end, and they can use Hotwire. They can be applied to where I work. So it is suited for CRUD, as we can do with responsive admin panels.
I'm not sure I agree with that. It also depends on the architecture, but Hotwire goes the other way, back to the monolith, as far as I can see, where you can build something very fast. Like it optimizes for build speed, not for performance speed. Or at the time you are going for microservices, and depends on what your definition of that is. But if you want to connect some UI to different services, I don't think Hotwire is the best tool for that, because it's doing full stack development. Like, it's not an API, it's not a separate client side app. Yeah, maybe the question is about something else, but that's what I got.
All right. So let me see if we have any more questions or any other further comments. So I'm sorry, I missed this comment as well from Tazan Heather. He is saying Rails is amazing, but very less resources available.
Oh, how is that? I mean, I think to me at least, there's not that there's too few resources, but there's a lot of outdated resources because Rails has a bunch of versions, right? It's version 7 now. And
Yeah.
a lot of code doesn't work with the new versions. I think that's the problem, because otherwise there are a ton of courses out there and books about Rails.
Right. So let me check. I don't think we have any further questions. I'm really glad that we are within, well, not actually within, but just a little bit, 8 minutes over our 1 hour mark. So, but still, I think that we are moving towards the end of our session. So that's pretty great. I personally really enjoyed the code samples, and you know what, Cesar, I really enjoyed as well the how you explained Turbo's features. So like frame, streams, drive, I think that is something that might be a bit confusing for some people. So it's good to have like, code samples and snippets kind of like help you decide that, okay, sorry, not decide, but help you kind of like see it in action. So okay, so we do have another comment from Junaid S. And we have a problem where users want to update some data within our microservices, and our service doesn't actually take request forms the users. It is used to update preferences. There I can see the usage. But we just got a comment from Kamaluddin, Hotwire won't be suitable for microservices. I think we'll have to do a separate session on is Hotwire suitable for microservices or monoliths.
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. I don't know.
I think so, because apart from, so Hotwire was something that was really trending, and we kind of like wanted to do a webinar session on it, of course, and especially when Rails 7 was released, they made Hotwire the default. So again, one of the reasons we wanted to do this. But at the same time, so while this is trending, Rails 7 is coming up with a lot of different features. They have also made some things obsolete. Like for example, they've said goodbye to Webpacker. Now they've introduced import maps and everything like that that's going on. So that's one thing that's going on, like so many things that are being changed in Rails 7. And then there's a completely separate topic that I've seen with a lot of like in our sessions, that there's always something related, whatever topic it is, it always comes down to, is it suitable for microservices or monoliths? So I think this is also a very trending topic, because a lot of companies, so my take on it is that yes, microservices are very, very popular. Some of the comments that I've heard from a lot of developers is that so it's really difficult for companies to migrate from a monolithic architecture to microservice architecture, and they're kind of like stuck. I don't know, there's like a huge debate on this complete topic itself.
Yeah, there are people who have tried services and coming back to monoliths. I think there are different problems for different people, and people that are trying to go from monoliths to microservices are usually huge companies, which are do have performance problems, but also do have huge teams, and they want to make those teams productive and work on separate projects. The way I see things now, I don't think Hotwire is going in that direction. I think Hotwire is more optimized for smaller projects like startups, solo developers. Yeah. That's my feeling of how I see Hotwire going. And I'm not sure it's a good candidate for that. Maybe that will change going forward, but as things are right now, I don't see how that's going to happen.
100% agreed. So my personal opinion now, if anybody has a different opinion, they're free to say that. But I do also agree that, Hotwire really offers solo developers the capability to utilize full stack development without having to go out of the Ruby on Rails comfort zone. So that's one thing. For solo developers, and number two, for small scale teams that don't really have the resources or the money or the time or even the manpower to, like have a really big technology stack. So there's that. All right, so I think that we are moving towards the end. Okay, so I thought it would be a really nice thing to do. So, a Team RubyConf was kind of like thinking that, okay, why don't we do a giveaway session, for the live viewers. So, considering that, our the community really has been growing a lot. So I think it makes sense for us to do like a really small giveaway. So I am really glad to announce that Junaid S and you are going to get a RubyCon Pakistan merch from our team. Do please DM me, and I will send you all so that I can ask for all of your details and we can send you the giveaway package that is RubyConf merch. Honestly, of course, we are a nonprofit organization, but it's really nice to, give back to the community and, keep it engaging and everything. So if that is something of interest to you guys, if you are interested more in giveaways, please do let us know. I think that would be really amazing that, we can have a giveaway announcement at the end of our webinar session that, who gets to take the gift. So there's that. Thank you, Junaid. Thank you, Kamaluddin. Thank you, Emmett, Sufyan, Fazan, everybody. It was really nice to have you. Also, Aisha as well. So, thank you for making this session really, really interesting. And of course, a huge thank you to Cezar for taking out the time for the session,
thank you, and
providing us with amazing content. And just being here. I honestly, I love collaborating with international speakers just as much as I love collaborating with domestic speakers. I think it's amazing. So a huge thank you to you.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone who was here at the presentation.
All right, awesome. So just to kind of like echo, if you are really interested in Cezar's courses, or if you're interested in more of his content, I will link everything in the description box. So make sure to check it out. We love supporting content creators, obviously Rails and Ruby on Rails content creators. So make sure to show your support by subscribing to his YouTube channel. He's been doing amazing work. So there's that. Junaid is saying, thank you, Cezar and Sabrina. It was a great session, and that is awesome. Of course, I hope you really like the giveaway. So there's that. So let's just end the live stream now. I hope everybody has a good day. And I hope that, we kind of did try to make it a bit productive. And now you guys can continue with your weekend partying. All right, so let's just end. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you all have a really great weekend. Bye-bye.